right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Everybody, hopefully you guys know one or both of us, but to reintroduce myself, my name is Morgan. I'm I guess, like fourth year medical student now. I don't really know what to call myself. At NYU Grossman School of Medicine, applying into family medicine for the 2026 match. When I applied to medical school, I submitted 16 applications. I got 12 acceptances to MD programs through AMCAS and TMDSAS. And for like the past 3 to 4 years, I've been helping applicants like yourselves navigate the medical school application process and increases your chances of acceptance. So I'm super excited today for us to chat about the activity section. And I'll give you a chance to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Awesome. Hey everyone. My name's Antonella, but a lot of people know me as Nella or Nelly. I'm a new third year medical student at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I kind of inspired by Morgan, created this page during my gap year after college, just to kind of put my information out there, maybe inspire other people. And through that, I posted a lot about my application, how kind of I was like non-traditional, took a gap year, applied a little bit later than other people. I ended up applying to about 22 schools, MDs. I got 8 interviews and was accepted to 7 of those. So really excited to talk about this. I love, I'm an open book, love sharing about my experience, how we can help other people. I used to edit some personal statements and activity sections, and I've just had no time to do that recently. But if I have more time eventually, I will let you guys know. But yeah, super excited to be here tonight with you guys.
Awesome. So just some logistics for everyone that's joined us. If you have any questions, there's like a question mark in the bottom right corner. So try to put your questions there. That'll help because at the end, we're going to do all of our Q&A. And then if you just want to like chitty chat, then you can put that in the comments. So we're just going to start a little bit with some logistics information, like what is the activity section? Why does it matter? What does that look like? So depending on what application service that you're applying to, the activity section can look very different. So I would say most people apply via AMCAS, and so that's usually what I would say the majority of our information is going to be tailored to tonight. So AMCAS, you have 15 activities. Each of those has a 700 character limit, and then you have 3 most meaningful activities, and for those, you'll have an additional 1,325 characters. For ACOMAS, it's a little bit different. So they don't have a limit on the number of activities or the number of achievements you can have. They kind of split that into 2 separate sections, but it is 600 characters as the limit. So usually if people are applying to AMCAS and ACOMAS, I'd say write your AMCAS ones first and then cut down 100 characters to get to ACOMAS. And then if you're applying to TMDSAS, again, there's no limit on the activities, but the character count is 300 to 500 depending on the activity type. And then they offer most meaningful, and it'll give you an additional 500. So it's really hard to cut down like 700 to 300. So it's kind of just a totally different process to writing the activity section for TMDSAS. But if you just want to kind of give us maybe a little bit of rundown of what activities you included in your AMCAS application, and like how did you decide what activities did you fill up all 15, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I only applied through AMCAS to MD schools, and I did fill up all 15 activities. So my background was that I was a student athlete in college, so I played lacrosse. So that is obviously a big part of my application, a big time of my commitments. And, playing lacrosse at a D1 sport was one of my most meaningful experiences of my 3. So a lot of my application, like we talk about, you might hear people talk about like the theme of your application.
Mm-hmm.
So mine was very much like athletics, sports, some community service. I didn't have a ton of research experience, but I'll get into that. So I ended up putting lacrosse, playing Division I lacrosse is one of my most meaningfuls. Another most meaningful of mine was that I played international lacrosse. So I played for Team Puerto Rico.
Awesome.
And I was one of the founding members of that. So that was another one of my most meaningfuls. And then my third, so as you can see, two of my most meaningfuls were non-medical related at all. But my third one was, and it was this shadowing experience, like internship I had for a month. That was just awesome. So that was my third most meaningful. The rest of my experiences were just kind of all over the place. So I used some activity boxes to talk about awards I'd gotten. So I got some awards from like the biology department, some athletic awards. Scholarships was another activity section I took up. Clubs that I were a part of. So like the pre-med club I talked about as one activity. I created this other club called Morgan's Message. That was another one of my activities. Some other shadowing activities. So like COVID was like a huge, like during my sophomore and junior year, COVID hit. So like I wasn't able to get a lot of in-person shadowing, but virtual shadowing was one of my activities section, as I did a lot with that. And then I also listed jobs. Like I was a family nanny, I was a peer tutor. I did a lot of community service with my team, so I listed that as another. So kind of a lot of things. I don't even, oh, sorry. And research was one of them. Research was one box. I was in the honor school, so I had to write a thesis. So that was my boxes. And I also wrote, like, I did like 2 semesters of research too. So as you can tell, like, I kind of have a lot of things, not very scientifically heavy if you kind of look at it from broad spectrum. While I was heavily like involved in my bio department and the pre-med club, a lot of my activities were just like non-science medical related. And I think that was the strength of my application. But just goes to show, like, it doesn't have to all be about bio or science or chemistry or whatever. I was really self-conscious about that in my application cycle because it's like I'm applying with other people who have like thousands of hours of clinical experience and nurses or people who are like in the labs for all 4 years, and that I just was not possible with my schedule. But just know, if your story is true to you and your activities are just like a great representation of who you are, I think it will just benefit you as a person and as your applicant if you're able to convey that through like interviews and stuff like that.
I totally agree, and I really appreciate you sharing, giving us a little bit of behind the scenes about what your activities section looked like. I'll do the same. So I also really wanted to invite you on here because I feel like our applications looked very different, yet we still had amazing application cycles, still got multiple acceptances. So it's just another, example that you don't have to fit in this cookie cutter platform, but like you said, stay true to yourself. Like adcoms are going to see that and they're going to want people like that. So one of my most meaningful was a clinical experience. So I worked at a family medicine private practice for 2 years. Actually, like accepted or wanted to start the job in fall of 2019. And then of course COVID happened, ended up starting in like August of 2020, right when it was like crazy in the middle of the pandemic. So it was totally not the job that I was anticipating, but it gave me a lot of really good experiences of like learning on the fly and really how to navigate like mass distribution, testing, vaccination distribution in the middle of a pandemic. So that was a really meaningful experience. I also was involved with the 4-H program. It's like a youth development organization ever since I was 5 years old. And then they had a summer leadership program that I did when I was 16. And then throughout college, I was a counselor for that summer leadership program where we worked with high schoolers and college students. And so that was another one of my most meaningful activities. And then the last one, I was involved with Clemson Hope. It was a student-led nonprofit organization where we mentored kids in Title I schools or low-income schools near where I went to undergrad. So those were like my 3 most meaningful. So again, one of them was clinical, but then 2 were very much not clinical, but really just spoke to, I feel like, my heart for service and working with different communities, especially underserved communities. And then my other activities, let me pull them up. Of course, I had one for like honors and awards. I had one for research. I had one for shadowing. I was a tour guide at my school, so I definitely talked about that, and I got asked lots of questions. We had a Council of Diversity Affairs at my school. I was a member of that, worked at my health professions advising office, and then just a little bit more volunteering. I included a hobby, and then I also did like a medical service trip. And like you said too, I also just like had jobs. So I worked at Chick-fil-A, so I talked about that. And people always love to talk about working at Chick-fil-A for some reason. So that's something that I've continued to talk about. But one of the things that I want to really hone in and focus on is the AAMC Pre-Med Competencies for Entering Medical Students, or you may have heard of them as the AAMC Core Competencies. So if you're watching this, I would definitely take the time to pause. Well, if you're watching this on YouTube later, like pause and go look up what the AMC core competencies are, because this is officially like their recommendations. These are the things that pre-meds that are wanting to go to medical school should have. And your personal statement is about why you want to be a doctor. You're not going to be able to highlight all of these competencies in your personal statement, but the rest of your application, specifically the activity section, and then also like your secondaries, but specifically the activity section is really that place to highlight those competencies. So when I was, writing my activity section, I really just listed out all the activities that I wanted to include. And then I would list like what competencies I wanted to highlight in them. So let's just say for Clemson Hope, that was one of my most meaningful volunteer. And, I was in a leadership role, different leadership roles, and we had a lot of different teams and committees to make everything happen. So teamwork was the thing that I wanted to highlight there. And then for KUGA, this was the Tour Guide Association at my school. I wanted to highlight my social skills. For Council of Diversity Affairs, I wanted to highlight my cultural competence. So of course I didn't highlight every single competency, but I really try to make sure I was hitting on different ones. And that kind of led me when I was picking what experiences within an activity to talk about, because you have to think about, I'm just thinking about you did lacrosse. That was so many different years of your life. I did 4-H from 5 up until, now. How do you figure out what you're going to put in 700 characters so that can be a way to kind of guide you on that process? And I think also thinking about different ways. I worked at the family medicine practice for 2 years. So that kind of showed my commitment. But then doing lacrosse, navigating being an athlete, that kind of, shows how you can balance and do multiple things.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point in that you want to convey all of these different competencies within the activities you're already doing. Like, I feel like everyone can have different GPAs, different scores, whatever, but I feel like what really differentiates people and applications as a whole is like who you are as a person, what activities you're doing that are you're passionate about are true to you, and like how are you able to convey those? Because a lot of people can have these really cool experiences, and I'm like reading through them when I'm editing things, but then the way they describe them like tells me absolutely nothing. And I'm like, man, the title of this sounded so cool. I would have loved to learn more, like how they made an impact or how this impacted them in their career as a pre-med. But like, I feel like writing out your activity section is such an art. It is hard to do, but I feel like it can really make or break an application because there's only so much information you can give school by your MCAT and your GPA, right? Your personal statement is huge, but then it's your activity section that really tells a person, like, what does this person like to do? How can they make a good teammate? How do they interact with others, the world? Like, how are they thinking? So I feel like definitely don't sleep on the activity section if it's something you've been putting off. I know AMCAS, the application's opening up right around the corner. Like, spend just as much time on this as you did on your personal statement, because it can be a huge like doorway into like people getting you interviews just because they found something like your hobby interesting, or this like club you did that you started that's new that they haven't seen on any application. So like, it's such an art, and we can kind of talk about how to write them, but you bring up great points. It's like you want to make sure you're explaining those competencies they want to see pre-meds have, especially when going into med school, like through the activities you're doing on your own already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's such a good segue into navigating how you write the activity section. So I'll chat a little bit about how I recommend writing them and how I wrote mine. And so I really try to avoid like writing a resume, but there's certain ones where it kind of may read like that. And so my outline is like this 3-part outline. You're like, how are you doing an outline for 700 characters? But as I was looking back at my activity section, I kind of use the same outline. And when I'm reviewing applications, ones that I'm like, okay, I actually know what they're talking about and I understand why they did this, it's usually in a similar format. So the first thing I do is always say, introduce the organization if needed. If you were just like working as at a hospital or as an EMT, like please don't tell me what EMTs do. We know, we don't care. That's when you can just dive right into telling the story. But for the one that I'm gonna give an example of in just a second, you needed to introduce this because it was an organization that was specific to my school. So if I just dived into it, people are gonna be like, girl, what are you talking about? Then you want to share a little bit about your role and or story. If you can share a story that also incorporates your role, I think that is really nice. Again, if you have to explicitly like say what your role is, that's totally fine, but really try to incorporate some storytelling. And then you want to highlight what you gained or learned from the experience. And as a reminder, this does not have to directly relate back to medicine. The activity section is for us to learn about who you are, like what are your passions, what makes you excited. And of course, some of that may be medicine, and hopefully it is because you're going to medical school, but I don't want all of it to be because, someone will tell me about how they like to crochet or something. And then they're like, and this manual dexterity is going to help me in the operating room. And I'm like, girl, please just like tell me why you enjoy crocheting. But I'll talk about one of my experiences, the Council of Diversity Affairs. And so again, in that activity name, I would put Council of Diversity Affairs, and then I put in parentheses CODA, which was, the abbreviation. So then I could save space when I actually wrote about it. So I said, CODA raises awareness of issues impacting diversity on campus, advises student government on these issues, and promotes inclusion amongst the student body. So that's telling you a little bit about introducing the organization because people wouldn't know what CODA was. And then I talked a little bit about what I did. I assisted in hosting President's Table, an event where the president of every student organization is invited for a panel and dialogue on diversity and inclusion. Serving as a roundtable moderator, I encourage discussion between student leaders while making note of their recommendations to enact change on campus. As the current liaison between CODA and 6 organizations, such as the Asian Student Association, I am able to familiarize myself with backgrounds and cultures that differ from my own. So you can see that was just a way of I introduced it. I talked a little bit about what I did. I talked about a specific event rather than trying to talk about everything that I did. And then I highlighted my impact. So whenever you can, add numbers to kind of quantify your impact, do that. So, it doesn't seem like a lot, but, it was just me and these 6 organizations, and that's what I did. And that's what I was proud of. And so I talked about that. And then, like what I learned or gained from the experience. And so that would be more of like that's the closest to like resume type that I would like to see in your activity section. And I could probably pull up, let me see if I can pull up another one from my AMCAS application that is different. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about Clemson Hope. So this was one of my most meaningful, but I'm just going to read the initial like blurb. So again, introducing it. Clemson Hope is a nonprofit organization that provides mentoring programs at Title I elementary schools. I enjoy developing relationships with the students. My first semester, I exchanged letters about school and life with my mentee, inserted their name, and we met at the end of the year. During lunch, we savored the cafeteria's rectangle pizzas while he quizzed me in Spanish. As the program director during the pandemic, I utilized my flexibility and creativity to use technology to continuing our mentoring program for 229 mentoring pairs. There were technical challenges, but it was worth it to continue the mentorships with the students. I will serve as the vice president for the 2021-2022 academic year. And then again, I go into like, because it's my most meaningful, I share a larger story in that 1325 characters, but I was able to quantify my impact, 229 mentoring pairs, and then also talk about like this moment that I had with my mentee, and then just also like reminiscing on the rectangle pizzas that they had. If any of you guys ever went to public school, like I just cannot get over them, and they're still my favorite thing ever. So yeah, that's a little bit about how I organized it. Do you want to share a little bit about how you organized it? Also, feel free to share if you have any examples. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I also similarly kind of followed your 3-step rule. And one of the things like I've noticed since becoming, like being on social media and like getting the opportunity to edit other people's is like you look back and you're like, darn, I should have done this.
Oh yeah.
I feel like
I
when
read
I
mine, I'm like,
was,
this is so bad.
yeah, no, seriously, I'll look back at mine and be like, wow, I truly knew nothing, which is why it was helpful to read other people's applications like yours and those who came before me. Because then I had no idea how to structure it, but I then followed kind of try to do similar to you where the beginning it's just like if this is something totally new, like introduce it. I hate reading an activity. I'm like, wait, I have no idea what it is. Like obviously if you're doing shadowing, if it's like a broad research thing, if you're working as a waiter, like you don't need to explain what a waiter does. Like don't
Right.
waste your characters, right? So just go right into it unless it's something like a unique club that you should, 1 sentence, 2 sentences max, introduce what it is, and your involvement in it. Like I was the founder of this, I was a member of this, and then your body of this little paragraph should be what you did, what impact you might have made, what impact it might have had on you. But one of the biggest things I tell people is to really like, we're showing versus telling.
Hmm.
And if you're not sure what that means, it's huge. You'll hear it all the time. But telling is like, I was in this club, I made an impact by doing this.
Hmm.
And it was really meaningful to me. Like it just it's falls flat. Like there's so much more you could write it versus saying I made an impact. You could tell a story of like, oh, I would wake up at 7 a.m. on Saturdays, spend my time at the nursing community, and I really
Right.
made impactful relationship. Like there's another way to say you had an impact on someone versus just blatantly saying that. So if you hear someone say show versus tell, that's what they mean. Like try to be a little bit more colorful. You don't need to state the obvious, because it's just like, okay, cool. Like anyone could say, I want to help people, but like, how did you do it?
Exactly.
So just keep that in mind. And I know, I think it was Dr. Gray's like book on like how to write the activity section was helpful for me. And he talked about that a lot, like showing versus telling. So I tried to use that a lot when I was writing my paragraphs. And similar to what you mentioned for like the most meaningful, because you get those initial characters and then you get an extra like 1300. So the first one was just like me explaining what was my role, if I had any impacts, like just stating those statements. And then my most meaningful second paragraph was just more of a story of something that was impactful to me, something unique. And that was like really where the meat of my story was. So I'll read you one here. This is my paragraph, my activity from when I joined the Puerto Rican national team. So my first paragraph was just kind of stating it. So I was an inaugural member of Puerto Rico's first under 19 women's national lacrosse team. I was selected as one of the team captains and competed with my two youngest sisters at the World Championships. I helped the team go undefeated in 8 games. I listed some of my stats. Said I had the honor of representing Team Puerto Rico again at the second national team a couple years later. And then, so that was just like my first paragraph. And then my second was just more of a story and like what it actually meant to be able to have this unique opportunity. I got to play during the summer with my sisters on this like pre-Olympic team. And that was like where the meat of everything was, like in a very story. And it's a very unique story. So, and this was one of the experiences that I got asked about in like every single one of my interviews. So again, like you don't have to have something like crazy unique, but I do really think that depending on how you write things, and if you can write something so that the reader can see that you're obviously passionate about it, it's something you spent a lot of time on, you're committed to it. They can tell through your writing that it's something that excites you and like drives you as a person. I feel like that can really take you far. It doesn't have to be some like you were an Olympic athlete or you cured cancer.
Right.
It doesn't have to be something crazy, but again, just showing that passion in your writing and your commitment or your perseverance through some challenging difficulties, like those are the stories that I'm like, wow, like this person has been through a lot, or they've like spent a lot of time thinking about this, or they seem really passionate. And so like when I'm reading through personal statements and like providing advice, like that's what I look for in terms of their writing. And you don't have to be the best writer. Like I do not in any way, shape, or form think I'm a great writer. But if like again, you can just convey those passions, like I think that will take you far versus having to have like an English degree and all that stuff. So
Yeah, and I agree. And I totally think that's also why you want to get someone that has gone through this process, someone that's in medicine to review your activity section. Because just like you said, when it was time to apply to medical school, I was like, what the heck? I wanted to do something in science. Like, why are they making me write so much? And now here I
mhm.
am again, of like applying to residency, and I am somehow in the same boat. And I'm realizing that I do not enjoy writing once again, but again, just have someone who can understand and like understand what it's supposed to look like, because I think one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I give when I'm reviewing activity section is that it doesn't feel personal. And this is something that I was told when I wrote my first draft, and I'm like, boom, it's gonna be a one and done. Like, did the personal statement, gave all those edits, but like activity section, it's easy. You're just talking about what you did. And they were like, I don't know anything about you. This feels like something that anybody could write. And so just kind of like incorporating those stories. Like in my activity section, I talked a little bit about how I suck at like identifying people's faces, but like And I couldn't do that while I was working at a family medicine practice where everybody was wearing masks and I only got to see their eyes. But then, 2 years later when the mask started coming off, I got to see that. I talked about my specific mentee when I was volunteering at the elementary school. So little things like that, but really like putting those stories in there rather than just writing it like a resume. I feel like that gives admissions committees insight into who you are and why you chose the activities, not only to put your time into, because everybody's busy. There's always other things that you could do. Every undergrad has a million different organizations. Why did you pick these? And not only that, but why did you pick these to put in your activity section on your medical school application? Another thing that I want to chat about is writing about shadowing on the activity section, because I think that's a question that I get a lot and I reformat it for a lot of students. I will just say that it doesn't really matter how you put it on there. It just matters that it's on there. But the way that I recommend it, I did like a shadowing class in undergrad. So I would shadow 1 to 2 times a week, a bunch of different doctors, which honestly I couldn't even remember all of their names, but I remembered the specialties. So instead of listing out every single physician that I shadowed, I put the health center, and then the specialty that I shadowed. And then for the contact information, I put one of the doctors that I shadowed the most amount of hours. And of course, my hours were cumulative between all the different physicians that I shadowed. And then after I put that, so it was like 4 lines of hospital system and the specialty. And then I had a little bit of extra space, so I wrote a little bit of a blurb about one of my most meaningful shadowing experiences, which I still remember to this day. I was shadowing anesthesiology, and when they put like people to sleep when they're kids, instead of like it just being this like big scary thing, they get these like crayons that smell good and they can like draw on their mask and then they put it on their face, and so it's like fun and interactive, and a lot less like screaming kids. So I talked a little bit about that and just seeing how you could adapt in different situations, but that's usually how I recommend talking about shadowing. But again, it kind of depends on what your shadowing experiences look like. I know you kind of mentioned you had a shadowing experience you put for your most meaningful, and then you had another activity. So how did you organize that?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I feel like when I'm editing essays, the shadowing one is a one that particularly students have a hard time with, like rightfully so. It's especially hard if you've done like so many different shadowing, you've shadowed multiple different doctors from multiple different
Mm-hmm.
centers, and like then you want the tendency to write them all, but then by
Mm-hmm.
the time you've done that, you have zero characters to talk about like something actually
Right.
important, right? So like almost like 99.9% of pre-meds are gonna have shadowing on their application, right?
Yes.
So I really feel like unless you had like one doctor that was super meaningful, if you shadowed in 20 different specialties, you don't need to list that doctor's name. You can say I've shadowed in multiple specialties, including
Mm-hmm.
anesthesia and whatever. Like keep that short, because at the end of the day, it does not matter what you shadowed in. Like
No.
no one's gonna care
Yeah.
big picture. They're gonna care more about what you wrote, like what you learned from this experience of
Right.
shadowing. So you really want to be conservative with your characters and what you're giving out. Like you don't need to list I did 8 hours of this one, 10 hours of this one.
Mm-mm.
Keep your hours, just put your hours cumulatively, like all of the hours you've shadowed at all the places, put that in your description. And then when it comes to your actual essay, just right, I had the opportunity to shadow multiple doctors and this and this. One of my most fondest experiences was this, or I was
Exactly.
really grateful for the opportunity to get to see the work-life balance of like working inpatient versus working outpatient. But they want to see like what you got out of the experience versus like you just listing these doctors and I saw this procedure, I saw this surgery. Like don't list surgeries you've seen, don't list like specific
Yeah.
procedures unless it's
Nobody
like
cares.
specific to something like you thought was cool and you're going to talk about. Like no one's going to care like how many surgeries you saw. If you got to see an open heart surgery, cool. Unless that's like what you're writing about, it doesn't matter. So we just want to hear more because again, every single pre-med is going to have shadowing on there. The only thing that's going to make a difference is like what you personally like got out of the experience, what was impactful, what you took from that experience, like and maybe want to implement as a future clinician. But just keep that in mind again, because I think research and shadowing are this one that like everyone's gonna have. So like what's gonna be different about yours, right? So many people are gonna shadow neurosurgeons, like orthopedists, dermatologists, family medicine,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But like what was the specific patient interaction, the interaction you have with that doctor or whatever that like wow, like you should write about, and wow that you might actually get asked about interview. Because again, like interviewers, like they may or not have access to your activity sections, but if they do and like it's something cool, they're gonna ask about it. So again, you want them to have something cool to talk about in your interview. So just like don't sleep on that shadowing opportunity by just thinking you have to list it so that you check that box of shadowing, because it could be like a missed opportunity to talk about something actually cool that they see that is medically related, and that could actually help them see you, okay, like, oh, they had this shadowing experience, they know what it's like to be in this shoe, like I could see they actually have a passion and maybe could be a good fit as a medical student, whatever. Just like don't skip over that. A lot of people use that shadowing section to like check a box and move on, but that's just like a missed opportunity on your application to like, again, talk about you, because we want to know more about you. The activity section is like such a unique section. You have 15 different opportunities to like give something unique about you that's different that you can't read anywhere else. So just use every single box strategically.
Yes, totally agree. So just kind of summarizing what we've chit-chatted about so far, like I would say the three questions that I want to see answered in your activity section for each activity is like, what was the activity? Why did you do the activity? Why does it matter? And a fourth one, like, what was your impact, if any? So definitely something to think about. And other things that I want to chit chat about are like mistakes that I've seen. These are not just like, I'm not saying there's like mistakes that I see people make. I'm like the same mistakes that I made when I was writing my activity section, which is the whole purpose of why we're here, is like helping you guys. So hopefully you don't make the same mistakes that we did. So a big mistake, not introducing organizations. We've already kind of chit chatted about that. Of course, like organizations are roles. And I think it's really hard too because, I think about KUGA, that's the Clemson University Guide Association. It's an organization that to me, I'm like, everybody knows what KUGA is. And I'm like, nobody outside of Clemson knows what KUGA is. And even similarly, when you're using abbreviations for like states, I'm like, SC, that means South Carolina. Everybody knows that. Well, apparently some people up north don't know what SC is. And so I think that's
Crazy.
also a really important like reason why you want to get people not just that know you, but people that, can have an objective eye to read your application, because I read a lot of applications and I'm like, you might think that this is something that everybody knows, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And so it just makes sense to just take the extra characters to introduce it and explain it, so that way there's no question. Because when admissions committees are reading your applications, like we get thousands of applications. They're not going to be like, oh, let me Google what this is, like I'm doing when I'm revising your, activity section. They're just going to be like, okay, don't know what that is, so I'm just going to ignore that one. So you might have an amazing story and they're never going to get to know that. Other things is like wasting characters saying your role. So, for Clemson Hope in the activity, like name, I put Right for Hope leader and vice president. So then I didn't have to put, Right for Hope leader later on. Again, if it's like a really important role, like, how you were talking about one of the inaugural members of the lacrosse team, like you want to emphasize that, then you would include it. But if it's not something you need to emphasize, then you don't need to like waste time and that waste characters. And that's another way that you can save on characters. And then again, just like reciting like a resume. If you worked as a medical assistant, I don't need to know that you learned to draw blood and that you took patient vitals. Like, that's great. Like, why does it matter? What did you learn from that experience? Even like, what are you going to bring from that experience to medical school and beyond if you like want to go that far? So those are just some like things. Any other things that you see or like things that you're thinking about?
Yeah, something else I mentioned is just like the contact information stuff. If you're early on in the process and you still have time, like you're probably going to hear this and I wish I'd done it, like actually keeping track of like the
Yes.
activities you did, the contact person, the hours, like it is so hard to have to sit there and be like, oh my God, how many hours did I spend doing this thing freshman year, 3 years ago? So if you're like, and it's something now as a medical student, I actually do, like I have an Excel sheet and I keep track of it because I know I'm going to need it for residency, and it has been
Mm-hmm.
so helpful. So like when I'm, fourth year med student chilling, I'm not gonna have to be like, oh my God, what I do first year. So if you still have time, or just like a notebook, anytime like there's, patient interaction, something cool, write it down, because then when it comes to like actually like counting hours. I like struggled with that. Like I had written about like my honors thesis, and although I spent like all 4 years of my college writing this honors thesis, I only wrote about like my like presentation and that it lasted 1 hour. And then someone was like, "There's no way you put an activity that was 1 hour." I'm like, "No, actually, like it was a 4 year project, and I just put 1 hour." You know what I'm saying? Because like I didn't know what to do. Same for like research. If you've done like semesters worth of research, like try and keep track, like how many times a week did you do? Because it is hard, like to like think of that after the fact. And just another thing you mentioned, like not writing a resume in your activity section is important. But again, just like keep in mind, like anytime you have the opportunity to talk about something new about yourself that you haven't talked about in your personal statement or another one of your activities, like try and include that in small ways in your activity section. And I think you mentioned this earlier too, but I absolutely hate when people like try to connect things to medicine
Yeah,
that like don't need to be
I
connected.
can't.
Like if you love to run because that is a passion of yours and you like to stay fit, whatever, that is totally fine. It doesn't have to be like, I hope
Yes,
to like do this and like it'll help me become a better future doctor.
please
Like
no.
it doesn't have to be. You can just like running. You can just like to cook. Like not everything has to be connected to medicine. And sometimes you feel like every single of your activities have to like in some way like this will help me become a future doctor. This will help me think like a better doctor. This will help me de-stress. Like you don't have to say all that. Like we don't care because at the end of the day, you're not just going to be a doctor. You're a
Mhm.
person. You're a sister, brother, whatever. So just talk about you and be authentic to each experience. Like if you're talking about your club, like focus your activity on that one club. It doesn't have to be about medicine unless it's medically related, whatever. But yeah, I think that's really a lot. And like don't sleep on your like jobs. If you have jobs or like non-medically related things, like it is so okay to talk
Yeah.
about them. Again, like as you can see from our experiences, like a lot of my stuff on my application, the majority of it were
Hmm.
non-medically, non-science related. And I honestly think that was a strength of my application. So like if you think, even if you think these small things you've done or they're big things in your life that aren't going to be important because you don't think they're medically related or whatever, like I bet you someone's going to value that about you and they're going to see like, oh, they did this in addition to being a pre-med, in addition to wanting to do medicine. They also work, you know, on the weekends doing this, or they work full time and as a as a pre-med
Hmm.
student. So just don't forget like to include all those things about yourself. You don't want to look back later and be like, man, I should have just talked about that. Like it's a huge part of my life. So just be authentic to you. And one more thing I wanted to mention is like we talk about you don't have to be a great writer. I don't consider myself a great writer, but now like in the age of chat GPT and all that stuff, like just be careful. I know they're trying to come up with ways to like check
Oh,
essays, and you know I've
yeah.
even heard about this from like program directors for residencies, like they can tell and they like are trying to figure out softwares to like, but again like all of the application stuff is so that we can learn about you, and like chat can only tell us so much about you guys, and at the end
Right.
of the day it can be really easy to be like, okay, like they didn't write this. If your personal statement is written one way and then your activities are written another way, like you can easily tell that that is not matching. I totally get it. You can put your essays in there to kind of check for grammar, like
Hmm.
how to write sentences better, but just be really, really careful with like having chat write you an essay based off of this prompt. Because again, it's not authentic. Anyone can do that. And at the end of the day, like don't be lazy, guys. Like this is your opportunity to get into med school, and like we want
Yes.
to hear it from you, not from chat. Like you do not have to be an amazing writer. It does not matter. But you don't want to obviously lose an opportunity because like they ran your essay through some like chat software
Yeah.
and they're like
It's
the whole thing is like through chat, like we're not even gonna look at his application anymore. So just keep that in mind.
they're gonna know. Like it's easy to read and to see if it's your voice, especially if someone open interviews, like we see your application that you wrote and then you're like talking to me. And I realized this because I was actually writing a lot of essays for a scholarship application. I got one of my close friends to read over, and he was like, you have this style writing where you love, like I love the same sentence structure. It's like my favorite thing ever. I love to start with like, a little intro clause, like comma, and then write a sentence. I also write very similarly to how I talk. And so he was able to give me like a little extra razzle dazzle, tune it up so I wasn't using the same sentence structure. But he was like, I can see through all of these that like it's the same person, like it's your voice. And I feel like that's very important too because it comes across as who you are. And also
Yep.
just going back to what you said about, journaling and keeping track of these activities. Just want to plug the pre-med planner journal that I
Yeah.
created, specifically
Fun.
designed for people that are, pre-meds, especially if you're in your early years, your first, second, third year, if you still have like a year or two until you're applying, you can click the link in my bio or just shoot me a message after this and I'll send you the link. I have it in both a printed version, which I absolutely love. It took me forever to make, but then also a digital version if you just want something on the go that you can use on your iPad. And one of the things that it does have is it has an activity log for like up to 20 experiences. So you can just go ahead and keep that contact information. You can journal and reflect every time you do that activity. So then when you're ready to write your medical school application, you'll be able to easily come back to that. So I know you guys have been dropping lots of questions. If you have any questions, make sure to go to like bottom right hand side where you see that little question, and then make sure to put that there so that way we can start responding to them. So I will start with this one. It is, how do we separate the most meaningful entries? Is the first one just for general description, and the second an anecdote. So yeah, so I think we kind of covered this. The first one, so essentially how it will look on the application is it will be this box and it will have like the activity name, the activity like title and contact information, and then it will say experience description and then most meaningful experience remarks. So it has like a line break, but it is back to back. So I have seen some people try to write one long fluid story, but usually like if you have two stories to tell, then you could do one shorter one longer one, or a little bit more like resume, like how you say a little bit about what you did, and then the second box to be a story. And just to clarify, you'll get 700 characters plus the additional like 1,325 characters altogether.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a good one. How do you avoid writing about the same activity 3 times in your personal statement, activity, and meaningful? Do you want to tackle that one, or you want me to tackle it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, obviously we don't know what activity this is, but if you're writing it in your personal statement, like that is okay. If you're also, going to talk about it again in your activities, like I definitely did that when I mentioned like lacrosse. Obviously, I didn't like in my personal statement, I didn't talk too much about it, but it was an activity. I wrote about it multiple times as activities, twice. But if you're writing it as like an activity and a most meaningful, I feel like that might be a waste. At the end of the day, it might just you're better off writing about that one thing as your most meaningful. I feel like this question is hard to answer because like we don't know specifically what you're talking about. But again, like you want to be strategic. If you're talking about the same thing 3 times, then you're just like missing an opportunity to talk about something different. Like your
Mm-hmm.
personal statement is a great opportunity to talk about those things that like are most impactful to your decision as to why you want to become a doctor. And if that's an activity you talk about later in your activity section, that's fine. Like, but just make sure you're writing a different story. So if it's the same activity and you talk about this one patient interaction in your personal statement, then try to talk about a different one in your activity section and try to like maybe showcase a different competency, like whether in your personal statement you talked about like the teamwork aspect, in your activity section you can talk more about how like you were able to communicate with patients or what you learned from them. So in like the way you write your experiences and your descriptions, that can be different. You obviously like don't want to write about the exact same thing in your personal statement, your activities, and your most meaningful, because those are just like all wasted opportunities, and no one wants to read the same story multiple times. So it's hard, but if you have multiple, experiences after under that one activity, I feel like you can write it, and it's okay to kind of mention it multiple times. Again, just like differentiate them. Like I had this one activity, but in my personal statement, I talked about this part of it. In my activity, I talked about this other part of it that maybe shows a different side of you, a different experience. But you want to give us something new every single time. Don't share the same story, because again, you're just disadvantaging yourself.
Totally agree. Yeah, I've seen that, especially when people, when I have the opportunity to review an entire application for someone. I love when I can do that because I can see how everything's put together. It's not, honestly, like, I'll be honest, I don't think it can't be that meaningful to you if you don't have two different stories to write about. So if you write about in your personal statement and you write the same thing in your activity section and you're labeling it as most meaningful, like, you have to give me more than that. In my personal statement, two of the stories I talked about were shadowing. But again, like when I put shadowing in my application, I just like put that I shadowed the specialty. And so I talked about like completely different stories there. So again, just don't repeat the same exact story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you put a awards as its own activity or as part of a bigger activity, it falls under like a club or research. Yeah, this is really good, and it honestly depends on the type of activity. So I had a activity that was titled honors and awards, and that's where I put different things like scholarships that I'd gotten, president's list. I got like a leadership award, an award in my major. So I just listed all of those, and for ones that, let me find an example here. Like I got the Frank A. Bertner Scholarship, and like nobody knows what that is, but it was presented to rising juniors and seniors at Clemson who display exemplary leadership qualities and an outstanding academic record. Or another one that I had, like it was again like for volunteerism. So I specifically said what the scholarship was and then like why I got it. But those were kind of all in the same activity. But then again, when I did one of my research ones, I had an activity where I talked about the research, but then I also had a publication where I put in a separate activity like that specific publication. So it just kind of depends. But like if you're just gonna put like President's List as an award, you don't need its own activity for that, because I would say like a lot of people are on the Dean's List or the President's List, and they can also kind of like see that from your GPA.
Mhm.
Let me see. I was also trying to look and see what I did for my, I don't know, I don't even think I put this in there.
I just am like similarly to you,
Yeah.
like I had at least two honors and awards separate activities, and like one was like bio and the other one was like lacrosse awards I had. But then there was also one where like I mentioned research and I talked about the research I'd done, and like um a special event in the research I just included in that one paragraph. So a lot of it's like you have to play the game. Like obviously you only get 15 if you're doing AMCAS, and like you don't want to waste a box if you can add it to something else that's related. Obviously, if that's not the case, then make its own box and try and put all your honors and awards under one if you can. But it's kind of like this other question someone asked, like if you couldn't fit one to two activities, like can you write them in your secondaries? Like yes. You want to be strategic about where you're writing what. If you can't fit everything in there, that's okay. Like you're gonna have plenty of opportunity to write about other things in your secondaries. But it's okay if it's all under one box, or if you just add them on depending on how many characters you have and like how many boxes you have. So you have to become like really good at playing the numbers game when it comes to writing all of these essays, because you only get so much, like so many
Yeah.
characters.
And I think that's another reason why you want to have someone that's able to, look over it, and, we can give you advice on, okay, I'm seeing a lot of this in your activity section. So like if you're in between these two activities, I think this shows a different aspect of you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, someone might ask you about your volunteering in the interview, and you can say, and they want to hear a story, then you can share another volunteering story that you didn't have time to put in your activity section. So kind of think about it like that. Let's see. We kind of talked about this. So I'll answer this one. How do you talk about your research publication? So I worked in a microbiology lab for too many summers, honestly. And so I just talked about a little bit about what I did specifically. So it was very like, I extracted DNA, and then I did this and that, blah, blah, blah. And it was related to like antibiotic resistance in agricultural production. My granddad's a farmer, so very like related to my family, which was then talked about in my secondary essays. But then I presented my research. So I had another activity that was presentations and publications. And so I mentioned that I was a co-author, and I put the citation. If you're like putting like that you were published, I think it's good to put the citation. And then I also was asked to do like an oral presentation for something totally different. But it was at like a national women's leadership conference. So I combined those like presentations and publications together, because that's like an experience type.
Mm-hmm. I also just had like one box talking about research because I didn't have too many. I had one for my research and another for like my honors thesis. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of just separately. And I feel like what you said, like explain a little bit what you did. If you have a publication, the citation I think is helpful to add. Include your hours. If you like presented, posters, anything significant. And if you didn't, which is totally okay, you do not have to have a publication or have presented at these big conferences. Like don't feel like you have to do that by
Yeah.
the time you graduate. If you didn't, then I would use this opportunity to talk about things you learned from this experience. Like I was able to learn about how to conduct a research project from start to finish, or my research project, wasn't like we failed, but we learned about troubleshooting and stuff like that. So don't feel like you can't add an opportunity because it didn't manifest into a publication or a presentation. Like we also still want to learn about your experience. Like what did research teach you? What did you get out of it? Because there is still a lot to learn from that. And I think that is helpful to see in med school too. Like, okay, maybe the research didn't go as planned. Like it is very hard to get research published, especially in like 4 years as like a student. So don't feel like you can't write about something if it didn't manifest into something big either.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that's also like thinking about back to those pre-med competencies. You really want to think about, if I had them pulled up earlier. So there are a couple like specifically related to thinking and reasoning and science. So human behavior, living systems, scientific inquiry. So in that one, it says applies knowledge of the scientific process to integrate and synthesize information, solve problems, formulate research questions and hypotheses. It doesn't say anything about publicizing. So I think just the process of understanding how do you come up with a question, once you have that question, identifying how you want to answer that, going through the process, the trials and errors of research, that is what the scientific inquiry that they're looking for, like that's where it comes at. And if you have any skills like SPSS or R, quantitative reasoning is something else, so you can always mention that. It's never wrong. That's definitely something where I would say, if you learned how to use R to code to do the scientific analysis, that's something that I would include in there because that's showing the med school like the role that you had in the project, as well as skills that you gain from that you will definitely take and can absolutely use when you get into medical school. So I think some of these questions we talked about, like chunking activities, we talked about like combining different things, we talked about do you tell a story. Awesome. So I guess the last thing, do you have any like final thoughts or tips that you want to share with everyone? I feel like we chatted about so much.
Yeah, again, I just feel like looking back in hindsight, there's so many things I wish I would have done with my activity section. But at the end of the day, I want you guys to remember that like don't sleep on this section because again, like so many people can get that MCAT score, can get a GPA, but it's going to be your personal statement and your activities that like will most likely be asked about in your interviews. So just remember that and know that we do care about those things you've done, whether you think they were big or small in your activity section. So really take the time to write like well thought out activities, explain the impact you have, how it impacted you in your life. Does not have to be medical related, science related. It can be your passions. Like, yes, talk about your hobbies. You can have one box and talk about all your hobbies, and
Yes.
they don't have to be related to medicine at all. That's something that's actually encouraged of us,
Hmm.
like when writing residency applications. Like they want us to have like a hobbies option because they want to know that we're just people who like have lives outside of school and studying and all those other things we do. And it's important to like learn something about you because I bet you 9 times out of 10, like your interviewer would rather ask you about like your favorite meal that you love to cook because you said cooking is your hobby versus like tell me about that research project you did. Like so just don't forget about the little things, and if there are things that you're really passionate about, that have people look over them and read them, so that we feel like your passion is coming through in your writing. I feel like that can be really hard to do if you feel like you're not a good writer and you're like, man, like I really love this, I want them to see how much I love this, but I don't think I'm writing it well. Like it's totally okay to ask for help. I like was so nervous about having people read mine, and I was like, I don't want people to know like what I did, but at the end of the day, like people are going to read them and like you want them to be good, so it's okay. Like ask your mom, ask a friend, ask a teacher, someone you trust, to look over them, see if they like can see that same passion, or they can, those people who know you, they might also have other perspectives and be like, why don't you write about this? Like I feel like you should
Hmm.
also consider this. So it's really easy to get like blinders on, especially when writing applications and seeing other
Yes.
pre-meds doing other things. So don't forget to like, I found it most helpful when I was having like writer's block and I couldn't figure out like how do I write this, like just talking
Hmm.
to my sister and calling her like, I am stuck, like how do I do this? And she'd be like, well, Nella, like you used to tell me you'd love this, and then we'd like talk it out, and she'd be like, you know what, that's a good point, let me write about that. So it was actually just like those spitballing brainstorming sessions with my family members that helped me, like inspired me to write things. So be creative. There's books online, like you have great resources if you like feel like you're stuck, but good luck, guys, you totally got
Yeah.
this.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of resources, just want to plug again, if you're applying the cycle and you have like no idea what you're doing, you want comprehensive guidance through the entire application process, make sure to check out my course From Applicant to Accepted. If you feel like you already have gotten that personal statement down packed, but you're like, okay, wait, AMCAS opens this week and I have waited on my activity section, make sure to check out my mini course, a step-by-step guide to the activity section. It's only $49 and it goes through again that step by step how you should write the activity section, includes all of my AMCAS activities, and it also includes a library of other people that have been successful in applying. So lots and lots of examples and guidance and brainstorming just to help you navigate that journey. And you can also, again, on my website, link in my bio, I am trying to get through as many applications as I can because I know it's a busy time before I start my sub-I in May. So I do have some spots available for personal statement and activity section editing. So just shoot me a message or click the link in my bio to sign up. And then, yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. If you don't follow me already, follow me.
Yes,
But
please.
yeah, guys, thanks. And I've like shared I think my personal statement, like activities I've done on my page. You might have to go digging for them, but they're up there. I have no shame. I love when other people are like, I used it and help me, or it sucked. Like, I don't care. But just know there's resources out there to help you guys, and you can always DM me. I'm like been terrible at them recently. I'm on a backlog, but I will try and get to them now that I have a little bit more free time. But good luck, you guys. You will be fine whatever happens with
Yes,
application season. Like, just trust in yourself and your skills, and it will be all good.
absolutely. And just one last question I see popped up. How late is your course open? Is there a deadline? There is no deadline to register. My course is open year round. Once you join the course, you're in the course for life. So any updates, things like that, you'll get. You also get application material review that you can use this cycle if you're applying. You can use a year from now if you're applying later. Also access to my Facebook community. So join whenever is convenient for you. But again, like you said, good luck to you guys. We're so excited. And again, like please reach out to one or both of us if you have any questions. We really want to help you navigate this process. And good luck. Bye.
Yay. Thanks for having me on.